Coming up on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show.
In the past, they cost tiny fractions of a cent, which was when people were talking about Bitcoin for micropayments. Well, that's not really possible anymore because in June, transaction fees on the Bitcoin network briefly hit about $4 to $5 per transaction. And while it's fallen back to cents, there were quite a few people who got burned because they had based a whole business model on some idea of having predictable costs.
Is blockchain ready to transact IoT business? That's the question I've been trying to answer during this mini-series. While the quest has been intellectually interesting and frustrating at the same time, the answer is a resounding no. Although the tech is cool, blockchain is nowhere near ready to be used for business within the budgetable future. In this episode of the IoT Business Show, I speak with Rhian Lewis about the promise and challenges of transacting with blockchain, Ethereum, and cryptocurrencies in IoT.
All this and more on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show. The people, the business, and the technology of the next generation internet. This is the IoT Inc. Business Show. And now, here's your host, Bruce Sinclair.
Hello and welcome to the IoT Inc. Business Show. This show is for business leaders and managers employing the Internet of Things for their business or the business of their customers. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair, and I interview the industry's leading authorities to find out how they use IoT to improve business and create value. If you like this show, subscribe to it on iTunes and go to iotinc.com to check out my complimentary articles, videos, meetups, and webinars. Well, the IoT Inc. Certified IoT Professional Program, ICIP for short, is almost ready. This has been a big and satisfying project that started around the same time I recorded my 2 short IoT courses at the request of Linda, or is it LinkedIn? No, Microsoft. 8 months later, and it's almost ready for beta. The program will consist of 3 full and self-contained courses: ICIP Technology, ICIP Business, and ICIP Strategy and Digital Transformation. Now it's funny because, probably like you, I've been hearing this term digital transformation for a while now. And I have to admit, I didn't like it. To me, it sounded like high-priced consulting buzzword speak, and so general that it was meaningless. But as I learned what it was all about, it became obvious that this is exactly what I covered in Chapter 8 of my book, IoT Inc. Hey, I'm not above buzzword hijacking, so I used the term to partially name my 3rd course, since, well, that's exactly what it covers. Anywho, it's exciting. Not only is my program almost ready, one of my courses is on strategy and digital transformation. Go figure. And with that, I give you more blockchain and IoT with Rhian Lewis. With me today on the IoT Show is Rhian Lewis. Rhian is an independent technology consultant specializing in blockchain. She provides technical support, training, and strategic advice to clients, and is also the co-developer and co-founder of the cryptocurrency portfolio tracker, CountMyCrypto.com. Rhian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bruce. Lovely to meet you, and thank you for asking me on.
So where are you right now?
I'm in London. As a consultant, I have clients in different places, but I tend to split my time between London and Berlin, which is my adopted home city, which I absolutely love. But at the moment, I'm in London.
Ah, okay. So that's why I was a little bit confused, because I got the accent, but then you were away, but you were in London. So, okay, that kind of explains it. Now, what is crypto? What is CountMyCrypto.com? What is that?
It's a trading tool to help people who trade cryptocurrencies. Of course, the best known cryptocurrency is Bitcoin, but this was my original path into the whole fascinating area of Bitcoin, blockchain and cryptocurrency, was trading these things. There are all these coins, over 1,000 of them, which share some similarities with Bitcoin, and you can trade these guys on different exchanges. So Count My Crypto started in 2013 when I was trying to keep track of my portfolio in all these different places. So being somebody who creates tooling for a living, I thought the easiest thing to do was to write a little script that would call the APIs for all the different exchanges and add up the value of everything I had there. So that I joined up with another developer who's a good friend of mine, and between us we built this web app which went on to be a popular tool that lots of other traders use. And by osmosis I became immersed through that in the whole crypto community, and from starting off with a purely financial interest in it, I became absolutely absorbed by and fascinated by the potential of blockchain, the architecture that of course underpins Bitcoin and other similar digital currencies, and that's probably now my primary focus. I still do contract work doing general technical consulting, but I'm moving more into having a lot more blockchain clients now, working on my own blockchain projects, and increasingly going out and talking to people about how to do this stuff, how to implement it, how to test it, and so on.
Now, what about how to invest in it?
I never give investment advice. Seriously, I think digital currencies are absolutely amazing, but I've never once said to people, hey, you should really go out and buy this stuff, just because you never know. So while I am happy to invest and play around myself, I don't really advise people to do the same, not unless they really know what they're doing.
Well, it seems that it's almost, I'll tell a little story. I mean, it seems like it's almost becoming mainstream. My son, this was just not that long ago when he was graduating from high school, and he was at a party at a friend's house, and somehow, under some altered state, he locked his keys in his trunk. So he was very smart, and he called our roadside service. The roadside service, AAA here in the U.S., came and basically broke into his car. He was observed being broken. The car in the neighborhood was observed being broken into, and they called the police. And so to make a long story short, my wife and I received the call. I think it was about 3:30 in the morning. 3:30 in the morning. We went and verified it was our son and everything was okay. But where the story gets interesting is that the tow truck driver, he kind of unbuttoned his shirt. My son told me this story. He unbuttoned his shirt slightly, and then he pulled out his pendant. I guess it was like a necklace and a pendant. And inside the pendant was a Bitcoin. And he actually gave the advice, and this is a tow truck driver, not that there's not very educated tow truck drivers out there, but he gave the advice to my son and his friends that they should be investing in Bitcoin. To me, I was like, really? I didn't think it got to that point of being mainstream. I mean, this is still somewhat of a mystery to most of your friends, I assume, isn't it?
It is totally a mystery to so many people. One of the other things I do, I also, for 3 years now with a friend of mine, have been running the London Women in Bitcoin group, because although it's still a minority interest among the population at large, there have traditionally been very few women indeed who are aware of it, invest in it, and so on. So we've been on this mission to make our friends aware of it, and what started out as 5 ladies sitting around a table in a bar that had a Bitcoin ATM where we could pay for our coffee or wine.
I've heard
yes. So we'd have these meetups in this bar where there was a Bitcoin ATM, and we'd show the ladies who turned up how to buy Bitcoin from the ATM, and then how to go to the bar and buy coffee or wine or whatever with their Bitcoin. And it's now turned like we had our last meetup last night, in fact, and there were more than 40 women there. And yeah. So it just goes to show how the interest is growing. And I do go to a lot of crypto meetups and so on. And you really, to re-emphasize really your point about the tow truck driver, you meet people from all walks of life. One of the meetups that I go to in Berlin, I was chatting to a guy there last year, and he was, believe it or not, a professional hypnotist. And his interest in it was he wanted to start accepting Bitcoin for his hypnotism services. So there's all kinds of wild and wacky stories that you can tell about people who find different uses for it or so on, I guess. I guess the message is that it's getting a lot more popular, but I still never say, hey, you should spend your life savings on it.
No, but when hypnotists and tow truck drivers know about it, it kind of says something. And I have to say, just a disclaimer, I don't have any investments in it, but I'm starting to feel like I somewhat should. Even if it's just one of these gambles, because there's a lot of interests that go against the grain of Bitcoin succeeding, or any cryptocurrency, obviously. But there's still, there's the will of the people that can actually overcome all those forces. So I don't know. It's almost like a lottery ticket. I think if you look at it like a lottery ticket as opposed to investing your life's savings, maybe that's not a bad way to go.
Yeah, and also, while I would advise people, I don't advise people to invest in it. I always say, if you're interested in how the technology works, then buy $5, $10, $50 and experiment with it. Just find out how it works. Understand the technology behind it. And even people who are working or thinking about working in a blockchain area that perhaps doesn't touch currency or that doesn't overtly involve finance, I say the best way to get to grips with it is install a Bitcoin wallet. Find out how the technology actually works from being hands-on with it, and then you have a much better understanding of its potential, I think, than all the reading in the world. Yeah,
no, I think that's a great idea. And also, even if it's just $5, £5, you have a vested interest in it by definition.
Precisely. Or even if you think that, Bitcoin's too expensive now, you hear people saying that. I mean, it may or may not be the case that it will go a lot higher, but the perception is it's very expensive now. Then pick one of the other currencies. One of the ones I like is Litecoin, which has been around for a long time. Install a Litecoin wallet. Play with that. That's less than $100 as opposed to Bitcoin being over 6,000 today. So it's much less of a risk. You've got less skin in the game, but you still get to be hands-on with the tech, which is the most fascinating thing, really.
No, I think that's great advice, actually. Well, let's switch the tech around and let's look at IoT a little bit. Why don't you tell us, Rhian, what's your background, and specifically what's your background in IoT?
Okay, cool. Well, I'm a tech generalist, really. My experience on IoT projects has been limited to, I did a long-running contract on a connected car project, which was super interesting. I can't really name the client because I'm an independent contractor, but I did spend 2 years on one project in Germany on a connected car project. So that was pretty awesome. And other than that, some friends and I prototyped a blockchain proof of ownership solution 18 months ago, which not IoT only in the sense of connected devices, but chipping devices, with NFC chip, and then using a blockchain-enabled app to scan and so on. So I'm not as deeply experienced in IoT or managing IoT projects as I know some of your guests are, but I love being hands-on with this stuff, and the whole area, since I was lucky enough to work on these projects, has been something that absolutely fascinates me, and I want to do a lot more of it in the future.
Well, it sounds like you're exposed to a number of different sources. Maybe you can take us through some of the most interesting areas where blockchain technology can be useful for IoT.
Well, obviously there are so many. I can't even count them. As you know, I do quite a lot of writing about blockchain and its potential. I did a blog post well over a year ago now, where I ran through 30 different use cases, 30 different potential use cases, and really it could have been 50, it could have been 60. I could have just kept going. Only I knew people would just kind of zone out after 30.
Well,
so
pick
I'll
the
just
top
pick
ones then.
Yeah. So one of my favourites is so say we take a few areas to concentrate on. For example, automotive, which is a subject close to my heart as I've worked on several car projects. Automotive, energy distribution, and supply chain management. So they're three quite different areas. So I'll just take you on a whistle-stop tour through some of the possibilities of these things. So I recently did a little bit of work, just technical writing really, for a London-based startup who are backed by Jaguar Land Rover, who took out a big investment in this company. And what they do is super interesting. Their special thing is blockchain for the mobility industry. So not just automobiles, but all types of transport. So they have a native token, a cryptocurrency, if you like, that is used to reward people who supply data in the form of APIs that can be consumed by transport networks. So that covers a huge range of things, from whether a bus is late, whether rain on the autobahn or the motorway or the freeway is going to be slowing down traffic. Anything that contributes to people's understanding of transport and mobility systems that could be used by connected cars and transport providers. So this could be a combination of data that comes directly from your car, because as I know you've talked about on your show before, so much data comes out of modern cars. So if you are willing to share that data, not just with your dealership or your garage, which is the normal use for it, but if you're prepared to provide this to other organisations and be rewarded for that, or even if as an individual you want to contribute data from a weather station in your garden or something like that. So you might be asking, well, apart from the cryptocurrency that's used as the reward, what is the blockchain use case here? And it simply is trust, because the whole point of IoT is that it's based on all this data, which is machines communicating with machines and then prospectively using that data to react to their surroundings or whatever. But you have to be able to trust that data. And because of blockchain's unique data structure as a decentralized entity that is distributed over many places and which is append only and cryptographically linked right back to the beginning of time, it means that it has this consensus mechanism that makes the data somehow more reliable than data that is just provided by a central source. So take, for example, it's a bit off tangent from transport, but it's data working in the same way. I often use the example of the intelligent oil pipeline. So people talk about the convergence of blockchain and IoT as something which in future is going to be able to massively streamline and lower costs in a range of industries. Mm-hmm. So at the moment, obviously, you have analysts working in the commodities sector who are using obviously powerful algorithms to crunch through and make judgments on the type of political situations, weather patterns that are going to influence the demand for oil somewhere in the world, and then oil is distributed to different places accordingly. Like, for example, if North America is forecast to have a very cold winter, more oil gets sent there. So this concept of the smart oil pipeline, you could be an individual with your own weather station providing data to this oil pipeline as part of a huge network of tens of thousands of people all over the world who are being rewarded in tiny increments of currency to provide this data, which can then be aggregated. And the oil pipeline can then itself autonomously route the supply of oil to different areas depending on different conditions. And the same for transport. You could have a freeway that the automobiles on the freeway are reporting back all the time via the data coming out of them that the road is very congested, that they have to slow down, there's been an accident. So the people who charge for the cars to drive on the freeway could then automatically, without human intervention, raise the cost to match the demand of the vehicles on the freeway at that particular moment, as opposed to just the price is lower at weekends or the price is lower in the middle of the night or something. So you could have things like instantly reactive pricing. So that's an example for the transport industry, certainly.
Well, let me just stop you right there. So my question, and this comes up a lot, and I agree, and it's one of the first things that came to my mind is trusting the data. Because as you rightfully said, all value of an IoT product comes from transforming data into some useful value, into some useful information, and therefore if the data is not good, then we've got problems in the value creation. However, I want to understand this a little bit more, or at least I want to make it clear to our listeners that where blockchain comes in on this trust factor is in the data provenance or the immutability of the data, meaning it can't be changed somewhere along the line. Now, you're going to have to correct me if I get this wrong, but where I see the vulnerability, or not the vulnerability, but the, I guess what needs to be pointed out, though, is the trust of the original source of data in the first place. So in the case that you were saying, the automotive company and using, some crypto currency to pay back a company or an individual that creates an API to a source of data, who's to say, however, that the original data that they put or that can be accessed by the API is correct, right? Blockchain doesn't, or the distributed ledger technology does not cover that, or it doesn't address that issue.
This is entirely true, of course. You're entirely correct that the power of this technology comes from its immutability, the fact that once something has been written to this append-only ledger, it is then extremely difficult and costly to go back and edit that or rewrite it in all its locations. But nothing is going to, you know the saying about if you put poor quality data in, you get poor quality conclusions out. So
garbage in, garbage out.
Precisely. So obviously thinking about the car industry specifically, the recent scandals over the diesel emissions and so on. Well, you could, for example, argue that those vehicle companies, if they were contributing data to the network, which involved those bogus calculations. I'm allowed to say that because this is proof. Then obviously that would be a bad thing. However, I'd like to add to that that one of the things that goes hand in hand with using blockchain technology is this idea of using reputation systems. And so Deloitte, for example, have a big investment in their Dublin office in Ireland, where they have a heap of people working on a blockchain proof of identity solution. And ultimately, the argument is that you would be able to evaluate, because of the transparency of a publicly maintained blockchain, you would be able to enhance this by using reputation systems over time to verify that the providers of certain information were reliable. It's not a catch-all. It's never going to eliminate this problem of incorrect data, but over time it should be self-adjusting, because you will have certain parties who will become more trusted or less trusted.
No, and I think that's a very good point. First of all, I don't think anyone should expect that people are going to behave differently, but it's just a misconception maybe for the uninitiated that when they hear trust, they think, well, we can trust the data. Well, okay, we can trust that the data hasn't been changed. But this is an interesting concept of the reputation systems. Now, because at the end of the day, whether it's fake news, whether it's fake audio, which, as we know, is starting to get to the point now where you can sample someone's speaking a speech or a number of different speeches, and you can recreate pretty much now almost indistinguishably any sentence that you want them to say, and this is coming with video as well. So the same issue comes down to what's real. We've had photoshopped images, is it photoshopped, is it not photoshopped? But it comes down to what you said, and that's reputation. That's really the only way in an online type of scenario where you can actually develop that trust. So talk to me a little bit more about the reputation system. Now, reputation systems have been around for a little while. Is there anything unique to blockchain reputation systems that makes it stronger, or is it just a smart way to use the blockchain technology?
Okay, I think the unique thing about a reputation system that's based on blockchain is that in the right circumstances, A, it can be universally trusted, and B, it because of its global nature. So it's not, for example, Equifax or Experian saying we know about this person when that is one centralized data source. That's one point. So say you have somebody who is identified on thousands of nodes on a network, on a system that's difficult to gain, then any organization who wants to consume that data and use it as a kind of trust oracle, then in a sense, probably in the longer term, once people get used to this idea of decentralization, probably more likely to trust it than something that's provided by a centralized entity. And there's also this notion of, although people talk a lot about Bitcoin being anonymous, actually it's not terribly anonymous, it's partly anonymous, and that's because at some point when this cryptocurrency enters or exits the system, it's generally detectable and linkable to a real person. So in the same way, there are facets of anonymity. So you might be able, for example, if you were in control of your own identity on a blockchain type system, to reveal only certain details to different organizations depending on what the question was, what you were trying to prove. So it's more or less unique because it puts the responsibility for people's data back in the hands of the individual in an idealized world. It's not saying that this is not necessarily what will happen, but this is what it has the potential to do.
No, and so what you're saying is not that you're using a reputation system with blockchain, you're actually using two blockchains. You're using a blockchain for the reputation system, and you're saying that decentralized mechanism, which I agree is going to be a more trusted source than some centralized body. But really, you're saying use then blockchain for the reputation system to make sure the reputation of the data provider is high enough that you can then trust it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying, because the whole point is that with a public blockchain that's in the public domain, where people can see the source of the data, they can see what they're getting, and in conjunction with a proof of reputation system, this then becomes a powerful tool. I'm now going to caveat this massively by saying that the technology is nowhere near this at the moment for any kind of scaled enterprise solution. The things that I tend to write about are the possibilities that I do genuinely believe we'll see maybe 5-10 years from now. But it's a little bit like the early days of the internet, when you had people talking about this future when you'd be able to not just have VR experiences, but even stream videos or have pictures, and everybody else was saying, but this is ridiculous, I have a dial-up modem and all I can see on my screen is text. And that's it's often said that where we are with blockchain at the moment is more or less in the mid to late 1990s as far as the internet goes. That's the parallel that's made. So I think at this stage it's much more important for companies to be thinking about the possibilities, prototyping, whatever, rather than expecting to have some huge, fully scaled solution that they can move all their enterprise architecture over to tomorrow, because that's not going to happen.
Well, let's dig into this massive caveat a little bit more, because I think it's very important, and it's not just for this use case, it's for all use cases. Rhian, can you give us a landscape of the metrics of what are the metrics that make blockchain or distributed ledger technology, however you want to frame it, but what are the metrics that make this tech 5 to 10 years out from today as opposed to 5 to 10 months out from today? What do we... And the reason I'm asking this, reverse engineering it, is because listeners are thinking, well, this is my use case, this is my situation. Is blockchain even, something I should be even considering or even thinking about in the short or mid term? So I'd like to understand the landscape. Is it the number of nodes? Is it the number of people that goes through? Just clarify that for us.
Okay, so it's primarily a problem of throughput. So if you take, for example, something like the Visa payments network, which has the capacity to process multiple thousands transactions per second, and you look at the Bitcoin network, which can do single figures, not single-figure thousands, but single figures, then you get an idea of the scale of the problem when it comes to Bitcoin. I wouldn't really say it's a problem for Bitcoin, because the trade-off for the speed is the level of trust, and maybe people are now seeing it less as something that is going to be used for multiple small purchases. But to extend this out to the Ethereum network, for example, which is the one that most people talk about in relation to IoT use cases. Again, we have this huge scalability problem, which people are addressing, and they're addressing it. It's undergoing rapid evolution, and it's likely that these problems will be solved. But just to put some numbers on it, as you asked for, there was a talk recently, or probably a few months ago, that I went to. The CEO of the video messaging app Kik, K-I-K, came over from Silicon Valley to London, and the Kik deal was significant because they were the first successful, proper company to do an initial coin offering. And I'm not going to go, we haven't got time to talk about these ICO things, but essentially they are a vehicle to allow people to invest in startups by means of purchasing a cryptocurrency related to the product. So Kik became the first established successful company with millions of users to do an ICO. Normally it's tiny startups. And someone in the audience asked the question, why are you not using Ethereum for the token issuance? So he made the startling point that in order to issue a token to every single one of Kik's users, it would tie up the entire Ethereum network for 23 days.
And how many users were there?
Millions, but not billions.
Okay. So a tie-up. Now, so let's dig down, just scrape this a little bit further. So I understand the transactions per second. But if we're to scrape beyond that, what is causing the single-digit transactions per second versus the 2,000 to 4,000 transactions per second that's happening on Visa? Meaning, just take us down one more level. What is it that's making the transactions per second so low?
Okay, well, again, I'm going to concentrate on Ethereum because that's probably more of interest to people who are involved in the IoT ecosystem. And think about it this way. You have what's called a smart contract, which is not actually a contract at all. It's a script. It's a piece of software. And instead of what traditionally happens with a non-blockchain app, where this piece of code is executed in one place, in order to achieve consensus, this piece of code has to be executed on every node in the network, ultimately. And there are thousands of nodes in the network. So you can see instantly how this is limiting the capacity, because every transaction has to be confirmed by a certain number of nodes. I mean, I say it has to be confirmed everywhere. It doesn't obviously have to be confirmed everywhere on the network for it to be a valid transaction. Normally you accept a few confirmations, but ultimately this piece of code, this execution, will be propagated across the whole network. So you can see how this is going to slow down capacity.
But I mean, okay, let's say it's a smart contract, and let's say it has let's say it has 500 lines of code, because it's a super complex contract. And maybe I'm off by an order of magnitude, but I don't know. Let's say it says it has 500 lines of code. That's not a big deal. I mean, if you're distributing it out to 1,000 to 10,000 computers, they can all execute the 5,000 lines of code. Take us a little bit further, because there's more to it than that, right?
Well, there's also transaction fees which have to be factored in. So I'll talk a little bit about this, because this is something that's particularly of interest to business folk who might be listening. The volatility of transaction fees is an issue for public networks, certainly in the days of this very nascent technology. Again, I think it's a problem that will ultimately be resolved. But the people who maintain the network, because of course in the case of public networks like Ethereum, anybody can download the code from GitHub and join the network. Mm-hmm. So as part of the incentive, along with the chance to mine, as it's called, to earn money in exchange for the bookkeeping, you are getting transaction fees. So every time you make a transaction on the Ethereum network, you have to include a small amount of Ethereum with that contract in order to execute it. Now, obviously, you make savings in other areas, because you're not, once the data is written to the blockchain, you're not then paying on a monthly basis to keep it there, like you pay. I mean, I know that AWS prices are amazingly competitive and you don't pay much to store a lot of data on AWS, but nevertheless, each month you are having to pay to keep your data there. That's not the case with the blockchain, but you have to pay to put it there in the first place. So this, while it's not a blocker, makes coding this stuff quite difficult, because in order to stop the network being spammed and tied up by a whole load of fake transactions, there is a maximum fee imposed. So you can't send a transaction with a very large fee and hope that the complexity of its execution isn't too great to be paid for by the fee, because the fee increases with the complexity of the transaction as well as various other things. So you have to guesstimate how much money to send with it, and that's part of the whole kind of testing and quality assurance process, making sure that your transaction has enough money. And in the case of Bitcoin, transactions normally just cost a few cents. In the past, they cost tiny fractions of a cent, which was when people were talking about Bitcoin for micropayments. Well, that's not really possible anymore, because in June, transaction fees on the Bitcoin network briefly hit about $4 to $5 per transaction. And while it's fallen back to cents, there were quite a few people who got burned because they had based a whole business model on some idea of having predictable costs, or costs that could be negotiated in the way that a large corporate might negotiate with IBM or AWS or whatever for data processing and storage. And this unpredictability that causes problems. I mean, there are inventive solutions like the IOTA network, which is a bit of a newcomer on the block. It's not really a blockchain as such. It's a related but slightly different data structure. And its USP is that instead of charging transaction fees, a device can participate in the network by confirming two other transactions. So the price of joining the network is validating other transactions, which is quite a neat way of getting around the whole fees issue. But this is such a rapidly evolving landscape. It makes it really exciting, but at the same time, it makes it complex to plan things like costs, speed, scale, and so on.
So we're looking at an IoT type of architecture. We have a number of sensors. Let's say we've got 100 sensors. Let's say we have 100,000 sensors. I'm having to do all this computation. I have a distributed database, so I'm actually having to store everything everywhere. From an IoT perspective, what are we looking at? Are we having to do these calculations on our end nodes, with our embedded systems? Are we having to have the memory to hold an entire database? I know it's distributed, but an entire database on each of our end nodes. Just give us a little bit more, visibility into those issues.
Okay, so it would depend on the device or the network. I think in most cases you are possibly doing something as simple as just giving a device or an object a digital identity on the blockchain and then associating its data with it. It wouldn't be in every case it wouldn't be in most cases that the object that's registered on the blockchain would be a fully functioning node per se. So if, for example, talking about supply chain management, in this case, you would simply be talking about tagging a shipment in some way. So you wouldn't have on each container, you wouldn't have something that was permanently connected to the network, generating its own proofs of work or whatever. You would just have this identity that was registered on the system. And then if you look at something like the Ethereum blockchain as a kind of giant state machine, as the as the data from this object is fed back, it then changes the object state. So, for example, you could have a ship full of containers where each container had its own identity, and as the container passed through various ports, or was signed off by various custom authorities, that data would be recorded in a smart contract. So it's in terms of you're talking about completely different possibilities according to the use case of each thing. You can have kind of inanimate objects that their only interaction with the network is just being registered, being moved around, using NFC or RFID to identify them and prove their location or prove their state. Or you can have something like embedded systems within a car, which is which has the power to send payments, to distribute information, and so on. So it's different horses for different courses, really.
I like that. Okay, so why don't you parse it for us? Because you made the statement we are 5 to 10 years, and I can't remember the rest of it, but it's 5 to 10 years from now. Is that applied to the supply chain problem, the micropayment use case, I should say, and the micropayment use case, or are there some that are realistic? Are there some IoT use cases that are realistic today, or are they all pretty much 5 to 10 years out? And then the next question I'm going to ask you after you answer that is, and why are they 5 to 10 years out?
Okay, so I'm going to re-qualify that. I think in the sense of having universal, of having massively scaled enterprise solutions, we're 5 to 10 years out. However, there are... Yes. However, there are real world scenarios which are live now, so therefore proving it can be done. There's a Maersk partnership with IBM for shipment tracking, which is actually being run now, and which proves the real world viability of this. Also, we had this energy distribution project in Brooklyn about a year ago, where the Ethereum network was used to record transactions between solar panels of houses selling their neighbours electricity generated by solar panels. So we've had real life examples of it. It's just that they have been more of a pilot nature than a fully realized enterprise solution.
And that's what I'm trying to understand, because really the question is at what scale. And that's what my question was earlier. What I was fumbling my way to try to ask was the metrics. And what I'm kind of, again, fumbling my way to understand here is both in shipment tracking and energy distribution, we have a number of nodes. The number of nodes in shipment tracking is going to be the number of parcels or the number of things that are being tracked. In energy distribution with the solar panels, the number of nodes are going to be the number of homes, let's say, that are participating. So am I getting that right? And then if I am getting that right, then the scalability issue is the next question. Of course, we can be tracking 100 packages, or we could be doing energy distribution sharing energy between 25 homes, but that's not scale yet. And that's what I'm trying to understand for our listeners is, where are we right now with the technology? And ultimately, the question I'm trying to answer is, should we even be paying attention to this now, or be, focusing on other issues? Because there's certainly enough other things to worry about. With the caveat of, when we're starting to design our architectures for our IoT product system environments, do we need to think about blockchain now, or is it kind of a next generation version that we shouldn't worry our pretty little heads about at this point?
Okay, so just a couple of things. I'll just revisit quickly a point you made about the number of objects registered on the network. It's it's not really, if you're talking about registering shipments, that's not really a node in the kind of fully functioning node sense of the word. It's more an object or a location in the network rather than a node that is actually generating work and generating proof and so on. That's a minor point. As far as the future goes, I think we absolutely need to be paying attention to it because it seems clear to me that it is that it offers huge potentials not just for cost savings but for entirely new business models. And if people don't start at least thinking about the implementation now, having key people within their organisations starting to think about it, we all know how long it takes to run a software project, even for something that people are used to working with, how long it takes to realise a project that involves any kind of incremental improvement to existing architecture in terms of reskilling people, scoping, developing and testing any kind of system. So I think it would be foolhardy to say, oh, we're going to start thinking about this in 5 years' time when the capacity's there. It's the organisations that have taken it seriously and started thinking about prototyping and how to implement these things that I think will have a real competitive advantage. I think it's really significant that some of the first big technical companies in the space were companies like IBM and Microsoft, who offer blockchain as a service and were in there very early realising the potential of this. And putting themselves on the line to a certain extent by getting right behind this. IBM were doing a smart home project with, I think it was Samsung, about 4 years ago, I think. They've been quite visionary when it comes down to it. And I think really organisations should be thinking about the possibilities and thinking about how they'd implement it and how, of course, they're going to get people skilled up and excited by the possibility of this.
No, of course, and I agree with you, and I guess I'm trying to quantify what you're qualifying. And that is when we're making business decisions, we need to, have some metrics, which is what I've been, trying to understand here. And from what I hear you saying is, of course, we need to understand it. And and I'm there too. I still need to understand it, obviously, a little bit more. But yes, we understand it. We need to have at least some eggheads in our organization that get it a lot better than I get it, and can maybe feed us some pointers when we're making our strategic planning. That I get. What I'm trying to understand is, and I think I'm kind of coming to the conclusion that we're talking in the nodes and the shipping. You're right. It's not the nodes of the packages. It'll be the nodes of the entities involved, in that, let's say, ecosystem. But we're talking tens, right? As of right now, we're talking tens of homes that are doing energy sharing. We're talking tens of entities that are doing the shipping tracking. Am I at the right scale or am I at the wrong order of magnitude?
I think certainly with the energy generation pilot that I mentioned, it was tens. However, it's worth making the point that the semi-private or the private projects that are going ahead within the banks, we know very little about these other than occasionally when the consortium, some of the financial consortiums come out and show what they've been working on. So it's highly likely that they are running at scale, and so certainly they would be running thousands, not tens of transactions. The IoT use cases I talked about certainly are lower volume, but we've got to remember that there are corporations all over the place working on this technology and using these kind of private distributed ledgers to start to scale up some of these projects, and they certainly would be now processing thousands of transactions.
So in addition to keeping on top of the technology, can you provide some advice for our listeners in terms of are there places they should be going to? Are there conferences they should be attending? Or what's your advice right now for the listener who's, again, maybe I've confused them more than they were before they started listening, but okay, we've got this blockchain technology. I understand this technology can do a lot of good things. It can do a lot of good things. I want to make sure I keep on top of it. How do I keep on top of it? What do I do to make sure that I'm not missing this the boat, that I'm not missing this the train leaving the station before, with all my competitors on it and I'm like left behind? What's your advice there?
Okay, I'd split my advice into two categories depending on whether people are working hands-on or more from a business focus. If people are working with their hands-on, the best thing to do is download the code and start working on it. So you can run a local Ethereum node. There are lots of tutorials and resources available about how to write smart contracts. Have a look at smart contracts. If you want to go down the private distributed ledger route, then get yourself a free tier account with IBM Bluemix. Deploy their sample blockchain application, read the documentation, have a look at it. This is all stuff that is quite easily accessible. From a business point of view, there are endless conferences now, a lot of which ends up online. So some of the content tends to be premium. The DevCon conference that's happening this week in Cancun in Mexico is the periodic Ethereum conference where a lot of new ideas are discussed. You have to pay to watch the stream of that, but it's actually really well worth it. And every city seems to have its own blockchain expo, big events with people exhibiting, people talking, whatever. I'd say there's just so much content now online that it's quite easy to keep up with, but it also makes it, there's nothing quite like seeing somebody explain something in person, especially in front of slides, and to understand the technology and hear it explained by somebody standing in front of slides who can explain it rather more coherently than me probably would be a really good idea, just to get a feel for what's happening out there.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. I like the advice of downloading the code. I like the advice of investing maybe in Litecoin. We'll put the links to the Bluemix sample code, and if you provide any other links to be able to understand how to use smart contracts within Ethereum. And then, yeah, I think there is a lot of information on the internet on blockchain, but I have to tell you, there's a lot of really confusing information. So I think your advice of actually attending and talking to people and listening to them and then actually being able to ask them questions, yeah, I think that's a good piece of advice. Rhian, where can people find out more about you and your company?
Okay, well, my company probably is of limited interest unless you're already trading cryptocurrency, and in which case it's countmycrypto.com. Otherwise, they can have a look at my Medium, where I write a lot about blockchain technology, which is, I guess you'll put the link anyway, but it's Medium Rhian_is. Perfect.
And all right. And anything else before we leave? You've left us I took us down a couple different rabbit holes, but you've really enlightened me, and thank you. I think everyone listening appreciates it. Any last piece of advice that you can give before we let you off?
Please, everybody, take a look at this tech, even if you don't have an immediate use case. It's just really interesting, and I sometimes wonder what I used to do with all my spare time before I discovered all of this stuff. So maybe that's a warning that you don't want to end up like me, but I'd just advise people to have a look at it. If it's not, it probably won't be right for most of the things that you want to do, but just have a think. I think the main thing is for people to just be aware that it's out there, be aware of the possibilities, and then when a use case comes along that it's right for, they'll know it.
All right. Well, thank you. You've helped everyone exactly on that path today. So, Rhian, thank you again, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Okay. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, that was episode 95. A great number, even though it has a 19 in it. To get an analysis of this episode, links to things that were covered in the show, plus a transcript, go to the show analysis notes. They can all be found at iot-inc.com/podcasts. Now, if you sign up with the long form, you get all the podcast transcripts as well as all the video transcripts. If you've been enjoying this podcast, subscribe to it. That way you'll get every episode delivered straight to your device. And there are 3 ways you can support this podcast. Share it on your blog, personal or company, if you think the others will find it of value. And you can share it on social. That would be appreciated. There are social links in both, or badges I should say, in both the mobile and the desktop version of the page. Or you can leave a rating or a review on iTunes. This is my favorite. Just go to iot-inc.com/iTunes/. It only takes 1 click or a little bit longer if you want to write your thoughts. The numbers are getting up there, and I appreciate and read every single one of them. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair. Thank you for listening. Until next time, may your path to IoT business be a scalable one.
You have been listening to the IoT Inc. Business Show.